They took everything from me. My dignity, my hope, and almost my future. But what they didn't count on was that a quiet, seemingly broken orphan could still fight back. And when I did, I made sure their perfect little world came crashing down around them. Was I wrong for exposing their true colors to everyone? Even if it meant shattering their reputation and the illusion they so carefully crafted? Tell me if you would have done the same thing, because honestly, I still wonder if I went too far, even though every fiber of my being says they deserved it. Let me take you back to where it all began. My name is Alex, and I was just 16 when my parents died in a car accident. One day, I had a family, a home, a future. The next, I had nothing but a social worker and a heavy heart. After a few weeks in a temporary shelter, I was placed with the Millers, a seemingly picture-perfect family. Mr. and Mrs. Miller, along with their 2 biological children, Sarah, who was 17, and Tom, who was 15, lived in a beautiful house in a very affluent neighborhood. They were pillars of the community, always volunteering, always at church, always with a smile for the cameras. My social worker, Ms. Davies, assured me I was lucky to be placed with such a loving and charitable family. I wanted to believe her, I truly did. I longed for stability, for kindness, for anything that resembled a family after losing mine so suddenly. When I first arrived, they were all smiles and welcoming words. Mrs. Miller gave me a tour of their spacious home, pointing out my room, a small, somewhat cramped space in the attic, but it was private, and for that, I was grateful. She told me they were so happy to have me, that I was a blessing. Mr. Miller shook my hand firmly, telling me I was part of the family now. Sarah offered a somewhat lukewarm smile and a brief hi, while Tom barely acknowledged my presence, buried in his phone. I tried to stay optimistic. I told myself that awkwardness was normal, that it would take time for us to bond. The first few weeks were manageable. They were polite if distant. I helped with chores, studied diligently, and tried my best to be unobtrusive. I kept my room tidy, my grades up, and my mouth shut. I cooked dinner most nights, cleaned up afterward, and did laundry for everyone. It felt more like I was a live-in maid than a foster child, but I didn't complain. I was grateful for a roof over my head and regular meals. I learned quickly that the Millers had a very public image to uphold. They were constantly hosting charity events, attending church functions, and participating in neighborhood initiatives. To the outside world, they were saints, opening their home to a grieving orphan. Inside, however, things were very different. The first subtle signs of their true nature began to emerge. My clothes, though few, started to go missing, only to reappear on Sarah. My small allowance, given by the state for my personal needs, was managed by Mrs. Miller, who would frequently borrow from it for family expenses that were never repaid. My meals became smaller, often leftovers from the main family dinner, while Sarah and Tom got fresh, hot plates. I tried to speak up, tentatively, once or twice, only to be met with a cold stare or a dismissive wave. "Alex, you're being ungrateful," Mrs. Miller would say, her voice dripping with disappointment. "We've given you a home. The least you can do is appreciate it." Mr. Miller would back her up, his gaze stern. "We expect you to contribute to this household, not complain." The chores escalated. I was responsible for cleaning the entire house, doing all the laundry, preparing most of the meals, and even tending to their elaborate garden. Sarah and Tom, meanwhile, lived lives of leisure. They had brand new clothes, expensive gadgets, and went out with friends constantly. I was rarely allowed to leave the house, except for school. My social life, which was already strained after my parents' death, completely vanished. They'd often make comments about my appearance, my intelligence, even my parents. "You know, Alex, if your parents had been more responsible, you wouldn't be in this situation," Mrs. Miller once said, casually, as if she were commenting on the weather. My heart would ache, but I learned to internalize it. I had nowhere else to go. School was my only escape. I was a good student, and I poured all my energy into my studies. My teachers were kind, but I never dared to tell them what was happening at home. I was ashamed, and I feared that if I spoke out, I'd be moved to an even worse situation. The Millers had a way of making me feel utterly dependent and worthless, eroding my self-esteem piece by piece. They monitored my phone and computer use, read my mail, and even listened in on my conversations with Ms. Davies, my social worker. They presented a perfect facade to Ms. Davies during her monthly visits, showing her a happy family that was thriving. They'd coach me on what to say, and I, terrified of the consequences, would repeat their rehearsed lines. One particular incident stands out. It was my 17th birthday. I hadn't expected much, but I hoped for a small acknowledgement, maybe a cake, or a simple happy birthday. Instead, I woke up to an even longer list of chores. Sarah had received a brand new car for her 18th birthday just a month prior, and Tom had gotten a gaming console worth hundreds for his 15th. For me it was nothing. Not even a card. When I tentatively mentioned it was my birthday to Mrs. Miller, she simply said, "Oh, already? Well, we have a lot to do today. Maybe we can celebrate another time." The another time never came. That night, I cried myself to sleep, feeling more alone than ever. The emotional abuse continued, subtle yet relentless. They'd compare me to Sarah, always finding me lacking. "Why can't you be more like Sarah? She's so much more organized, so much more charming." They'd joke about me being a burden, about how much they sacrificed to take me in. They even started to subtly sabotage my schoolwork, accidentally spilling water on my textbooks or misplacing my assignments, knowing that if my grades dropped, I'd have fewer options for the future. I was starting to lose hope. I felt trapped, like a bird in a gilded cage, except the cage wasn't gilded. It was just a cage. Then came the college applications. I had always dreamed of going to college, of becoming a veterinarian. I had excellent grades and was working hard on my essays. I applied to several universities, pouring my heart into each application. One day, a letter arrived from my top choice, a prestigious university with a fantastic veterinary program. I ripped it open, my hands trembling with excitement. It was an acceptance letter. Along with it, a scholarship offer that would cover most of my tuition. I was ecstatic. This was my ticket out, my chance at a real future. I ran downstairs, clutching the letter, eager to share the news with the Millers, hoping for a sliver of genuine happiness from them. Instead, Mrs. Miller snatched the letter from my hand. She read it, her face expressionless at first, then hardening. "A scholarship? Well, isn't that interesting?" she said, a strange, calculating look in her eyes. Mr. Miller read it too, his brow furrowed. "This is a very expensive school, Alex. Even with the scholarship, there will be costs. We can't afford that." I tried to explain that I could work part-time, take out student loans, do anything to make it work. I had been saving every penny from my odd jobs around the neighborhood that I did in secret. But they weren't listening. They had already decided. Over the next few days, their attitude shifted dramatically. They started to talk about how much they needed me at home, how I was indispensable for managing the household. Mrs. Miller even suggested I consider a local community college, or perhaps just work for a year or two before thinking about higher education. "You're so good with your hands, Alex. Perhaps a trade," she suggested with a sickly sweet smile that didn't reach her eyes. The unspoken message was clear. They wanted to keep me. They didn't want me to leave, not because they loved me, but because they needed my unpaid labor. They were losing their free maid, their scapegoat, their perfectly convenient prop for their charitable image. My acceptance to the university, my scholarship, my future. It was all a threat to their carefully constructed world. They couldn't have their charitable image ruined by their foster child going off to a prestigious university, especially if it meant losing their free labor. They started to actively discourage me, belittling my dreams, telling me I wasn't smart enough, I wasn't capable enough. They even went as far as to call the university, pretending to be concerned parents, expressing doubts about my emotional stability and my ability to handle the rigors of college life, due to my trauma. I only found out about this when a guidance counselor, who knew me well and was suspicious, discreetly warned me. So that's the situation I was in, and I had to make a choice. Here I was, an orphan teen, with an abusive foster family actively trying to sabotage my future, and the only hope I had, a university acceptance and a scholarship, hanging by a thread because of their malicious interference. I had endured their emotional abuse, their exploitation, their constant devaluation of my worth for over a year. I had tried to be the grateful foster child, hoping that one day they would see me as a human being, as part of their family. But that day never came. All they saw was a means to an end. Before I tell you what happened next, I want you to pause and comment below what you would have done in my shoes. Would you have just taken it? Would you have given up on your dreams to avoid conflict? Or would you have fought back, even if it meant risking everything? I decided then and there that I wouldn't let them win. I wouldn't let them steal my future, not after everything I had already lost. I was quiet, yes, but I wasn't stupid. And I had been observing them, watching their every move, learning their patterns. Their biggest weakness was their carefully crafted public image. They were obsessed with it, living their lives for the approval of others. I knew if I could expose their true colors, their whole world would unravel. My first step was to gather evidence. I started discreetly taking photos and videos with my old, hidden phone. Images of the overflowing laundry I was expected to do, the meager meals I was served, the expensive items Sarah and Tom flaunted while I had nothing. I recorded their verbal abuse, their condescending remarks, their attempts to dissuade me from college. I found old receipts showing how they misused the state-provided funds meant for my care, spending it on themselves and their biological children. It was painstaking work, but I was meticulous. I was building a case against them, a silent, undeniable testament to their cruelty. Then came the annual Family of the Year award, hosted by a prominent local charity. The Millers were nominated, of course. It was their moment to shine, to bask in the admiration of the entire community. The ceremony was a huge event, televised locally, attended by all the town's elite. Mr. Miller was scheduled to give a speech about their journey, and how blessed they were to open their hearts and home to children in need. This was my opportunity. The day of the ceremony arrived. I was, as usual, tasked with preparing the Millers, making sure their clothes were pressed, their breakfast was served, and their perfect facade was ready for public display. I had packed a small bag the night before, filled with my most precious belongings and the evidence I had collected. I told them I wasn't feeling well and would stay home. A common occurrence they readily accepted, as it meant one less burden at their public event. While they were at the ceremony, giving their pre-speech interviews, I was busy. I copied all my evidence onto a flash drive and sent anonymous emails to every local news station, newspaper, and prominent charity board member, attaching a comprehensive report of their abuse, along with select photos and audio recordings. I detailed their financial mismanagement, their emotional cruelty, their sabotage of my college applications. I focused on the hypocrisy of their Family of the Year nomination, contrasting it with their treatment of me, the very orphan they claimed to have saved. I made sure to include verifiable facts, dates, and names, making it impossible for them to deny. Then I went to Ms. Davies' office, the social worker who had placed me with the Millers. I presented her with the flash drive, my face calm, my voice steady. I detailed everything, from the missing clothes to the verbal abuse to their attempt to ruin my college chances. I explained why I hadn't spoken up sooner. The fear, the shame, the manipulation. She listened, her face growing paler with each revelation. She was genuinely shocked, and I could see the dawning realization of her own oversight in her eyes. She promised to launch an immediate, full investigation. I left her office feeling a strange mix of terror and exhilaration. My phone, which I had kept hidden, started buzzing with notifications. The news outlets had picked up the story. My anonymous emails had worked. My carefully compiled evidence was now public. Back at the ceremony, Mr. Miller was halfway through his heartfelt speech about true charity and unconditional love, when a reporter, one who had received my email, stood up in the audience. "Mr. Miller," she called out, her voice cutting through the polite applause, "can you comment on the allegations of child abuse and financial fraud currently circulating regarding your foster child, Alex?" The room went silent. The smiles froze on the Millers' faces. Their perfect world shattered in an instant. More questions followed, from other reporters who had also received my tip. Mrs. Miller looked like she was about to faint. Sarah and Tom looked utterly bewildered, their privileged bubbles finally bursting. The cameras, which had moments ago been focused on their benevolent faces, were now capturing their expressions of shock and panic. It was a spectacle, a public unmasking of the highest order. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic for the Millers. The Family of the Year award was rescinded on the spot. Their names became synonymous with hypocrisy and abuse. Investigations were launched into their finances, their charity work, and their foster care license. The news spread like wildfire, locally and then nationally. Their reputation, which they had so meticulously built, crumbled to dust. They lost their positions on various charity boards, their social standing evaporated, and many of their friends suddenly vanished. Their children, Sarah and Tom, had to face the consequences of their parents' actions and their own complicity in the mistreatment, enduring public scrutiny and the scorn of their peers. As for me, Ms. Davies was incredibly apologetic and supportive. With the overwhelming evidence, I was immediately removed from the Millers' care and placed with a truly wonderful, kind family who lived a few towns over. They were not wealthy, but they were genuinely loving and supportive. They encouraged my college dreams, helped me with my applications, and treated me like a real member of their family. The university, after learning the full truth and seeing my determined efforts, reinstated my scholarship and offered me additional support. I ended up attending that university, pursuing my dream of becoming a veterinarian. The Millers faced legal consequences. There were charges of fraud related to the misuse of foster care funds, and while the emotional abuse was harder to prosecute, the public backlash and their ruined reputation were, in many ways, a far greater punishment for people so obsessed with their image. I never saw them again. I heard through the grapevine that they eventually moved away, unable to bear the shame and scrutiny in their former community. Looking back, there are moments I wonder if I was too harsh, too unforgiving. But then I remember the cold meals, the stolen money, the emotional barbs, the sheer cruelty of trying to destroy a grieving orphan's future. And I know deep down that I did what I had to do. They mistook my silence for weakness, my gratitude for subservience. They thought they could use me, abuse me, and discard me without consequence. They were wrong. So that's my story. It's a messy, painful, but ultimately triumphant one. What do you think? Was I justified in my actions? Would you have fought back the same way? Or found another path? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you were on my side, dealing with that kind of injustice, please give this video a like. Subscribe for more stories like this, where the underdog fights back and finds their voice. Share your final thoughts on this whole mess in the comments section. I'll see you all in the next story.